to Landscape Photography World, the podcast for everyone passionate about landscape photography. I'm Grant Swinburne and I'll be your guide as we explore the world of landscape photography through the eyes and lenses of photographers, both up and coming and seasoned professionals. I like to dig a little deeper into the way they think about their photography, how it fits in their lives and where they see it going into the future. Peter Eastway has been photographing for more than 50 years, from film era long exposure and surf photography to becoming one of Australia's most decorated and internationally recognised photographers. He's also spent 4 decades in publishing, running Better Photography magazine since 1995. His concept of the new tradition and invisible Photoshop sits at the heart of how he works. Subtle, seamless post-production that expands creative control without drawing attention to itself. It's an approach that's earned him a Grand Master of Photography title and ambassadorships with Phase 1, Canon, Adobe and others. In this episode, Peter talks about using projects to guide his shooting, building a database of ideas by studying other artists, and why he makes work for himself rather than for judges. He's also refreshingly candid about the business realities of professional photography, his practical view of AI as a tool, and the difference between running workshops and photo tours. I hope you enjoy the show. G'day Peter, welcome to Landscape Photography World. Thanks for coming on the show. You've been somebody I've been wanting to talk to for a very, very long time.
Well, let's hope you still feel the same way in an hour's time, eh? We'll see how we go.
Yes, definitely. I first came across your work way back in 1981, and it was actually in a copy of the Minolta.
You're not that old, are you? 1981.
Yeah, I'm 61.
Good.
Yeah, I was a Minolta shooter back in the day, and I picked up a copy of the Minolta Mirror magazine, and there was a little feature of you in that particular edition, mostly shooting around Sydney. I think one of the images, and to be honest, it's one of the images that inspired me to get into long exposure photography, was one that you did of, I think it was sow and pigs, and it looked like it must have been probably about a 30 or 40 second, maybe even longer exposure, and that smooth, creamy water and everything.
Yep.
Back in the film days, which, to be honest, quite an achievement. You've moved on since 1981, obviously. So.
Well, I've sold my Minolta cameras, yeah. I mean, Sony went and took over Minolta cameras, and they kept the lenses, but they got rid of the camera bodies. And I never quite understood that, because the Minolta was probably ergonomically superior to both Nikon and Canon, but obviously I'd say that. And then Sony came along, and I think Sony's still working out how to make a really good ergonomic camera. Oh, I'm going to get hate mail for that, I know. But it's just, the Minolta cameras, they really had it, and then Sony just ditched it. But anyway, that was their loss. I enjoyed my Minolta cameras.
Absolutely, yeah. So did I. I've actually still got one on the shelf behind me, an old XG1. So it's.
I had an XM Moto, which I sold to Paul Burrows, and Paul's I think he's still the editor of Pro Photo and Australian Camera these days. And funnily, when I turned 21, all of my friends kicked in and they bought me a water housing to put the XM motor into, because I was a keen surfer and I liked taking surf photos. It was always a struggle because the surf was always best early, but I wanted to go surfing rather than taking photos. So I wasn't good enough to be a professional surfer, so I took the easy way out and became a professional photographer instead. But that was fantastic for a 21st present. Used to swim out and take 36 photos, because that was all you could do in those days. And it was a big, heavy camera, and I look at that and I think it was really rather silly putting that big camera in there. Much better to have a much smaller camera and swim
something
a lot
little
more
bit
easily,
lighter,
like a GoPro.
and easy to manage.
Yeah.
So why did you become a photographer? What was it about photography that made you say, this is something that I'm going to dedicate my life to?
Well, I don't know whether I ever had that conversation with myself. I know Dr. Les Walkling. Les is a professor, used to be professor of RMIT, still an educator. Are you familiar with Les Walkling?
I know him.
Yeah.
I know his name. I don't know of him. I certainly haven't met him or anything. But
Well, he maybe you should have a chat with him at some stage in the future
sure.
as well. But I met we were a group, the group of five of us. There was Les, there was Christian and Michael Fletcher, and Tony Hewitt and myself, and we were ND5, and we're actually planning on having another, a resurrection meeting, you might say. We're going to do it next year, but we can't find a time, so it'll be 2028. I hope I'm still here by the time we get around to it. Anyway, when we were ND5, it was quite refreshing because Les came out of sort of the art world and the academic world. Christian was out of the retail world because he sells his photos through galleries. Yep. Tony was in those days wedding portraits more than what he is now. He's more art and instruction, and I came out of publishing. So we had these different ways of looking at things, and probably Tony and I were the worst offenders in that we came out of the APA system, out of the AIPP, where you'd put in your best 4 photos every year and then you'd hope that the judges gave you a silver award or maybe a gold, and maybe they liked it. But Les used to say, and I'm paraphrasing Les, and I can't swear on this, but he'd basically say, don't worry about what anybody else thinks. When people ask you, why do you do something, just say because you have to. It's not something that you've got a choice in. And I think it's a really good answer. So I don't really know why I am still a photographer. So I've been going for about, suppose I'm 68, so I've been doing it for more than 50 years, even though I'm only 27. And I just do it. I love it. I mean, it's just a part of me. I can't answer why. Some people are lucky to fall into something that they enjoy. I've been lucky.
I'm very glad that you are lucky. As I say, I've sort of been following your work for a number of years. I'm interested in how you sort of have seen yourself evolve as a photographer. We talked a little bit about that one back in 81, that little feature in the magazine in 81. How have you seen your photography evolve since the film days, moving into digital, and how you sort of approach your photography? Is it the same? Is it very different? How have you changed?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've just moved out of the Windows universe into the Apple universe, and I've got a whole lot of audio visuals that I've made over the years, and I just processed one. I had to get OBS to record it on the screen, so because I've lost it, the PC and the software no longer operates. But I have got an executable, so I'm playing it back. It was in Africa, and it was when I went there with Ruby Spout in 1995, and I'm looking at the photographs, and in many ways the composition and the design and the style of photography is exactly the same as what I'm doing today. I looked at it, I thought, yeah, that's the way I'm still shooting. But the way that I'm able to execute things is quite different. Yeah. They were all shot with 35mm transparency in those days. I used to shoot 4x5 medium format, but for this particular trip, it was all 35mm. And I'm looking at the compositions and I'm thinking, yeah, this is, 30 years ago, and I haven't really gone very far, have you, Pete? And so there's a part of me, I suppose, that hasn't changed. But then, of course, when we're coming, when you're processing tranny film, you could make a 1/10 or maybe a 1/5 of a stop difference by adjusting the first developer time or something like that. We could micromanage it, but only by a little bit. Now, of course, I find I'm usually underexposing my photos by a stop at least, because I'm paranoid of clipping my whites, but I've got so much room to just bring out the shadows. And so the technology that we're using has completely transformed what I'm able to achieve. And maybe I'll be even better in a few years' time when I just type into AI, just make a Peter Eastway original. I won't have to do anything at all. It'll be all right.
Yeah, definitely. I can't see you doing that though, mate. I don't know. Maybe you will.
I've just done an article in the magazine about just refreshing AI. I mean, there's going to be a lot happening in AI over the next few years. And I said, well, about time I had another look at it. So I said, all right, I want a photograph of a walrus sitting on an ice floe, a little iceberg, and I want that iceberg to be in the middle of a barren desert. So I've got this idea in my mind of what I want. And so I type it into Midjourney and into Firefly and Photoshop and tried a whole lot of different ways. I did courses on how to write prompts and all this sort of stuff. So I gave it a good shake. And what I came back to was that AI is designed for people with no imagination. I don't mean that rudely, but I had something in my imagination and I wanted AI to mind read me. it's not realistic. And
Yeah,
so I figure that I'm never going to be happy with what AI creates because it's not my imagination, it's not mine. Now, my kids, my grandkids, they'll probably interact with photography in a completely different way, and maybe it won't be so important to them. But for me, I'm sort of quite reconciled with AI as a tool. I'll never use it to create things for myself because that's not who I am. But if I need a slightly wider background or whatever, I don't have a problem with using the technology if it's helpful.
Yeah, interesting. I've actually, I say recently, it's a bit over 8 or 9 months ago now, Adobe jacked their prices up, and I basically did some sums and worked out that over the years how much I've spent, and I had a look around and basically shifted to Affinity for the free version without any of the AI capability.
No.
The only AI capability I believe that is enabled in the free version is that you can actually do selections. So
okay, all right, yep.
Object selection, that's
Yep.
And even then you still got to go through and refine and fiddle it. It's not 100%. And to be honest, I'm actually really enjoying the fact that I'm not trying to prop up some of my photography with things that I don't naturally have. So if it's not in the photo, I can't use it. I can't create anything outside the boundary. So if I want a wider background, I'm stuck, you know. So, but in a lot of ways, those restrictions of not having that actually, I feel, have helped me adjust the way that I create my images, and whether or not anyone else thinks that they're better or whatever, I'm absolutely more satisfied with them simply because I'm not using those tools to do anything for me.
My wife's a graphic designer, and she does, apart from better photography, she does a lot of other publications. And she said that often her clients will give her photographs which aren't quite right, or the background's not right or whatever. And she's loving using AI because it empowers her to give the client a better result quite quickly and quite easily.
Sure.
And so I see that there's room for that. And you mentioned about selections, and I have to say I use Capture One and Lightroom. Probably Capture One a little bit more, although they're about to put their prices up too, and you've got to ask yourself the question. But the object selection or the subject selection, I think, is really speeding up my process and the creative process as well. It used to be that when you would make selections, they were so bad that you'd have to then basically start again. But now, as long as you're only going to do a small image for the internet, you know, for Instagram or whatever, the selections I find very good and very freeing, in that it allows me to explore an image much more quickly rather than taking an hour out to go and meticulously do some sort of a mask or whatever, a selection. And so that side I find it is very good. Mind you, someone's just ordered a print of mine with a couple of penguins floating around, and I had done that nice and quickly. I did that on the ship, and I'm looking at it and I'm thinking it's just not quite right. And when I enlarge it up, the mask is not perfect. In fact, the mask is far from perfect. And so then I'm spending another hour to go and refine the mask. So in some ways, AI is not there. But in other ways, what is Adobe and what is Apple? What are they all trying to do? And their world, for 99.9% of the world's population, is a small screen.
Yes.
And the technology for a small screen, it works perfectly. It's all that's needed. But then for us old timers, or if you're wanting to take your photography as art or putting it into a high-end photo book, etc., well, then it's not quite there yet. And that's probably good news for me, because I feel like I want to still have something to offer apart from just an automatic process.
Yeah, fair enough. The shift to digital came with something that you've actually written a book about called The New Tradition. And I think you've called somewhere in that book, you actually also have a term called invisible Photoshop. While we're talking about editing, I'm really keen to explore those sorts of things and where those concepts sort of come from. That, you know, particularly the new tradition, but also that invisible Photoshop.
Let's do the new tradition. It's really years and years ago. I bought a book, and I can't even remember the name of the photographer just now. That's terrible. But then again, hey, that's my old age. I can't remember your name either, Grant, so that's okay.
No worries, Peter.
But it was a book where you had the photograph, and then there's a story with the photograph. Then later on, a bloke called Eddie Ephraim's was a black and white worker over in London, over in England. He might have been Cornwall, anyway, it was England. And he did these beautiful, moody black and whites. And he had a book called Creative Elements, and it basically transformed a lot of professional photography out here in Australia. A lot of professionals read the book. I know that because I sold it to them, because I was distributing it through the magazine. And they were winning a lot of awards because rather than being an Ansel Adams lookalike, it was black and white, all done in the dark room, but using bleachers and toning, etc. But it was just a completely different way of looking at life. And it was transformational. But importantly in that book, he would have the proof on the left, his final picture on the right, and then over the page there would be a little bit of background, how he did it. And that basically sums up how I've approached Better Photography magazine. And I've been running that since 1995, whereas the idea is to try and show people before and after and give them the skill sets to take it to that next stage. Same with the new tradition. It's really 100 of my favourite photos. I think I've got about 30 of the books left, so if anyone's out there wanting to buy it, my wife would love you to buy another couple of copies because they're still underneath the stairs at home here and she's trying to clean them out. So that'd be good. That's a little bit of a rah-rah for myself. But it's 100 photos, my favourite photos, with just little stories and little anecdotes. And it's sort of reminiscent of what I took away from, his name will come back to me, and Eddie, who both were really instrumental in how I learned photography, but how I teach photography as well.
Nice.
So Invisible Photoshop was really a way of saying to people, just because you're using Photoshop doesn't mean you're using it well. And so many people would enter photos into competitions. So I did a lot of judging of this in the professional awards as well. And you'd look at the photograph and you could just see that they'd used a vignette just as a simple one. Or they would have darkened down something, there's an obvious line. And so I guess my suggestion was use Photoshop, but it should be invisible. When someone looks at the photograph, they shouldn't be able to say, oh, he's darkened there and he's lightened there. They'll be able to say, he's darkened over there somewhere, but I can't see where it finishes and ends. And he's lightened that bit, perhaps. I don't really, So you've got to leave that sense of mystery in there. And that's, I think, whether it's good Invisible Photoshop, but it's the same, Invisible Lightroom, Invisible Capture One, Invisible Affinity Photo.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point, is that, a lot of editing can be very obvious. And I think just about every photographer that publishes their work in social media has had the comment, oh, that's been Photoshopped. My response is always, yes, of course it is.
Yeah. I can remember having a photograph at an exhibition. David Oliver and I had I think it was called Affordable Art. It might still be going. I think it was in Sydney. And I had a photograph taken Kinloch in New Zealand. And it was a misty morning. It was a beautiful old clinker-style boat. And a guy was just bringing up a trout, I think it was, and the fish was there on the end of the line. He was just putting it into the boat. And I had this woman who was buying it. She loved it. And her husband walked up and he said, oh, it's Photoshop, you're not buying that. And he dragged her away. Now, out of all the photos that were on exhibition that day, that was the only one that didn't have any Photoshop. But there you go, you can't win it. So
amazing. So with all of your experience in photography, what is the one thing that you've kind of taken away from your career that is probably the most important thing that you would pass on to somebody, without trying to dig deep into your own educational stuff that you're trying to sell people?
No, not well. There's no secrets in that respect. I've got another wonderful little anecdote there which I can share, but I don't actually have a single thing. And I mean, I'm going to sell you something, but I got a new little program on the website called Photo Process, and there are 80 odd videos in there. And the reason I've called it Photo Process is because when I walk out and I take a photograph, there's not just one thing that says, this is what you should do. I've got hundreds of things. They say, what's the difference between plagiarism and inspiration? Plagiarism is when you go and copy the work of one photographer. Inspiration is when you copy the work of 1,000 photographers. And I think that's what we should all be aiming to do. Now, someone will say, well, that's what AI does. It just goes and scrapes all of the great photographs and gives you something. So why are we any different to AI? And in that way, we're not. We are just, carbon versions of AI. But having all of these different experiences and ideas and processes, it's not possible just to sit down with someone and say, here's what I do. If you do that, you'll have some fun. Because there are, as I said, there are 80 videos there, all just slightly different things. And it's sort of me just downloading what I've developed, what I've gained, what I've learned over the years into a resource so that I can say, and what I do these days is when I'm needing ideas for the magazine, I just go to one of those videos and write it as an article in the magazine. So if you subscribe to the magazine for the next 30 years, you might get all of them by the time we're finished, because I'm only quarterly.
Fair enough. You mentioned an anecdote there that you
yeah, well, people talk about techniques, and when people do come on workshops with me, or I give presentations, they say, oh, you're very giving. You don't seem to keep any secrets. Well, I have a lot of secrets which I don't share, but when it comes to photography, no, I don't have a lot of secrets. But when I was doing an article for Professional Photography in Australia many years ago, and this photographer turned up, and we spent an hour talking about his photos, which were great, and then he told me the technique, and I'm taking down notes, etc. And he says, oh, you're not going to write about the technique in the magazine, are you? And I said, yeah, isn't that why you're here? He said, oh, I've spent weeks, months trying to refine this. I don't want to just give it away to everybody. I said, really? He said, yeah. I said, I turned around, and behind me I had the Ilford Encyclopedia of Photography, and I opened it up to page 73, might have been page 74, but 73 sounds good. And I turned it around, I said, is this the technique you're talking about? And he went, looked at it, and I just watched him just go whiter and whiter and say, yeah, that's the technique. And my argument is that there is really, when it comes to the way we process photos and the techniques, whether it's post-production, in the darkroom, whatever it is, lighting techniques, there isn't an awful lot that's new. We've been doing it for a long, long time. The only thing that's different is you. And so again, when we go and we enter photos into photo competitions, etc., I say, don't try and make the judge happy, because the judge might have had a bad day and every photo is going to be crap. Or the judge might happen to like, your subject and you'll get first prize. Don't try and choose something that you think the judge is going to like. Choose something that you like, because only if you like it and then the judges agree with you, will you have found your way forward. So it's not like trying to second guess what other people want. I mean, look at social media. Someone gives $1 million away, and then someone puts their hand up and says, oh, you're a nasty person, you should have given 2 million. You know what I mean? There's always a negative side to everything. So just be happy with what you do. Try and take some nice photos. One exception to that, when you enter the Better Photography photo competition and I give you a report card, I'll give you a couple of comments, I'm right. Just wanted to say.
I love that. Do you think it's important for photographers to have goals in their photography, or is it, I guess that depends a little bit on whether or not you're a professional, a hobbyist or whatever, but in general, do you think goals are an important thing in photography?
Well, I wouldn't say to anybody that they have to have a goal, but I tell you what, it's very helpful. And so I often have a lot of projects going on, I'm trying to work out exactly what some of my projects are, and I think I'm going to call it structure, because I love buildings and structures in the landscape, signs of man and then the landscape taking over, etc. So old churches, old barns, things like that. Yep. And so when I'm going, so I'm up in Greenland, and there are all these wonderful little houses, so that's part of that project. Then I'm walking down through down at the Snowy Mountains here, and a couple of the old shacks out there. That's another part. So I've got all of these projects that are in the back of my mind, which are really helpful. One of the hardest jobs I ever had was as the editor of the magazine, and someone would send me a camera to review, and they'd say, all right, and I think, oh, I've got to take some photos. I wouldn't know what to photograph, because I'd say, well, I can photograph anything, but what am I going to photograph? Once you've got that idea, it sort of directs you, and it makes it so much easier to take good and meaningful photos. So if you don't have a project, you can call it a goal if you like. I like to use the term projects. Have a half a dozen projects. Might be the family, might be aerials, might be going to a particular place on holiday, so each year you photograph it in a slightly different way. Have a series of projects, and I think that really helps you, I guess, motivate and move your photography along.
Yeah, I can't agree more. It's one of the things that helps me focus, for want of a better term, on what it is that I'm trying to express in my photography. And
what are your projects then, Grant?
I've got a number of them that have been on the boil for a number of years, and a lot of my projects, I don't know they're projects until they start to coalesce in the mind, I will start taking photos. So there's a recent one which I completed. I say completed, I'll probably add to it and change it in the next 6 months anyway. I still haven't quite defined exactly what I'm going to do with it, whether it's an exhibition or a book or something else, I don't know. But that side of it, I don't start with that in mind. I normally get to a point where, okay, I've collected a number of images, I look at them and I go, there's actually a thread running through these. And that sort of tells me, okay, well, in this case, it was about textures. And there were smooth textures, there were rough textures, there were broad vista landscapes, there were tiny intimate details, a 50 centimetre square piece of rock in one of the images, aerial images, etc. But that theme that ran through them all was textures of water, textures of wood, and textures of stone. And so for me, that kind of coalesced into a project where I said, all right, well, there's some of these images that have been taken years ago, but they really do fit this theme, and started to pull them together. That then led me to then start to intentionally go out and look for those textures, look for those elements in the landscape, and actually start to put together a collection that I could then say, okay, well, there's probably about 10 really, really good ones here. There's probably about another 5 pretty good ones, and there's probably about another 5 that are on the edge of being in or out. So there's still more to collect, and as I say, there's probably a few more that I'm going to add to it, having done a few shoots since sort of coming up with that idea of saying, okay, well, that's a particular project. But, mostly I do seascape. That's really where
But that's a great description of having a project or a goal. And it doesn't necessarily mean you've got to sit down tonight with a glass of red wine and come up with an idea. But, you've just discovered something along the way, and that's become the project. And a lot of mine happen exactly the same way.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the best tips you can give to somebody that's starting out and wanting to think about their photography more seriously, is to say, okay, well, don't worry about setting yourself goals yet. Set yourself some projects. Think about what it is that you want to shoot. Think about what it is that you enjoy, and follow that. And those ideas will come along as you go.
Yep.
Speaking about landscapes, I guess I'm interested in how you connect with landscapes, in particular a new landscape. I know you've shot all over the world, so there's probably not many landscapes that are new to you, but how do you approach a new landscape? Are you doing a lot of research before you go on a trip somewhere? Are you waiting until you get there and just discovering it new? How do you approach those sorts of trips?
Yes, to both, I suppose. Sometimes I will research a place, other times I just turn up. I find that a lot of the road trips that we do, even though you might know the places you're going to, some of the best locations happen on the road, and you weren't planned at all. And so I take I think a rather serendipitous view of life, and I figure that there's a big camera up in the sky looking after me, and it'll lead me towards some good photos as long as I'm open to it. I used to stress about getting to a location on time for a particular photo. Now I no longer do. I say, well, if I don't get there on time, I might get somewhere else which is even better that I hadn't even thought of. So the idea of research is important, because it's terrible if you go to a place and then you realise that 100 yards the other way there's this amazing view and you didn't know anything about it. So that's a good argument for researching. On the other hand, if you go to a place and you've got all these preconceived ideas of some stormy clouds and all of that, and it's a bluebird day without a cloud in sight, well then you've got some problems there as well. You see, you're much better off perhaps going along and not having any preconceptions about what's there. And so over the years, I do find that it doesn't worry me. I don't actually concentrate one or the other. I do go to a lot of places regularly. I mean, I was looking at Bhutan. I'm just back from Bhutan with David Oller. That was my 8th trip there. Middlehurst, we're going over, Tony Hewitt and I, next month, and that'll be our 10th trip, I think, there. Shark Bay, I think I'm going there this Saturday, and that's about my 5th or 6th. I think it's Tony's 36th trip up there. So I do like going to places and repeating, and people say, why? And that's not necessarily, I mean, it's a good way to run workshops because people seem to think, oh, well, that's happening every year. But then people who come along, they say, well, what else are you doing? So it's this balancing. So we've got a trip to Morocco we're planning as well. And that'll be a lot of new stuff. I've been to the south of Morocco, not the north of Morocco. So when we do the north, and I'm quite upfront with the people who are coming along, I haven't been there. It'll be completely new. And so it's just this balance. But I don't think there's any right or wrong. I think more important is the database of ideas that you take along with you. And that really only comes from experience. And when I say experience, a lot of people glaze over and say, oh, well, geez, you know, I'm not going to be able to get the experience you've got. I hope not. That the experiences that we can get, the knowledge we can get is so much quicker these days than when you and I started off. I mean, Absolutely. We used to take a photo and it'd be 3 or 4 weeks before we'd actually see what it looked like. Now it's instant. Similarly, if you want to go and see what Franco Fontana's photography looked like, you go onto the internet and bing, you know, before we'd have to go and find a book, order a book, go to a library, well, we might never meet him. Might have to go to an exhibition. So the way that we can immerse ourselves in photography these days is just so much more accessible. It will take time. You're not going to become, you're not going to know who you are within the next 5 weeks or 5 minutes or whatever. It's going to take a number of years. There's no way around that. But isn't that good? I don't want to do something that I'm a legend within 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, I play computer games still, and I tell you what, definitely not a legend at those. They still frustrate the hell out of me. But I think that's good because it gives you something to work towards. I think the most important thing is just having that desire to build up a database of ideas. I talk about a 10-10-10 thing, which is 10 photographers, 10 photos of each of them, and then a 10-week period. And then once a week, Sunday at 7:35 is a good idea. Glass of red wine. White wine will work, but it could take you a little bit longer. Piece of paper, pencil, and then you've got 10 columns and the points 1 to 10. Open up the first photo from the first photographer, write down 10 things that you like about the photograph. You can write down 12, you can write down 8, there's no test. And you spend an hour, 50 minutes, whatever, 5 minutes per picture, just analysing. A lot of people think, oh, I'm an artist, I'm just go over and express myself. All of the famous artists, without exception, they were all very methodical, very thought. You know, you go back to Da Vinci and Michelangelo, you go and look at the more modern artists, you know, like I'm thinking of, like Picasso and just the simple ones there, that they were so well informed, they were so knowledgeable. Even Blue Poles, what was his name, and all the paint throwing everywhere.
Pollock, yeah.
That's right. I mean, these guys, they were so much, you read the history of modern art. Again, I thank Les Walkling for putting me into, that mindset of trying to explore the mind of other artists. They were so, in so many ways, structured. Yes, okay, throwing paint around might not look structured, but they knew what they were doing. And that's what I try to, I guess, emphasize to photographers, is that you're not just going to be able to take photos and walk around and hope it's going to happen. You're going to need to immerse yourself and enjoy it. I mean, it's a lot of fun to sit there and look at great work. I mean, Instagram will do it. Facebook will do it. I mean, you have to trawl through lots of ads and a lot of crap, but every now and then there'll be 1 or 2 photos that come up and you go, wow, I like that one. Sit down, spend 5 minutes with it. Don't just flick onto the next one. Why do you like it? Yeah. Because as you gradually build and reinforce in your mind why you're liking things, then when you walk out into the real world with your camera and you're standing looking at something, you'll think, oh, I've got these ideas that I could apply here. And suddenly you're taking much stronger photographs because you are being much more applied in your technique.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you raised a number of things there that I want to dig into. One of which is we started talking about the place and how you approach it, and the idea of going to the same place and repeating, not necessarily the same compositions, though, even in that case, and linking that back to what you talked about with artists, you have a look at, some of the greats, the Rembrandts and the Monets, etc., their sketchbooks, their preparatory works, which they never released, but can be found in art archives and so forth. You see them repeating that same composition. They're repeating details. They're repeating elements in that image to perfect it so that when they do the masterwork, it is actually a masterwork.
Yep. Very, very true. And it's also interesting when I do the photo tours and workshops, and I'll show people all the photos I've taken, and it's quite eye-opening for them, not because, I don't know why they think this way, but when you see 10 of my photos, which might happen to be half reasonable, they go, oh, wow, geez, they're 10 great photos. And people sort of think, wow, he took 10 photos, which are really good. You know, I take 100 and none of them are any good. What they miss is that I took 10,000 photographs, and they just happen to be the 10 good ones that I think are good enough to show other people. So it's this repetition, and a lot of the great photographers, I know there are, Irving Penn is perhaps my favourite portrait photographer, and you know, he's got these, you look at the photos and they're just sensational, but he didn't take one photo. He's got, you know, 3 or 4 rolls of film. It might have taken 5 or 6 rolls of film, spent a half day, maybe multiple shoots to get just that one photograph. So photography is not a precise craft in terms of the way we capture things. It's very rarely a precise craft. It can be, but the way most of us shoot, there's a lot of practice involved. So those 10,000 photos, if we end up with 10 good ones, that's not a bad average.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing that you mentioned was really looking at that repetition and looking at the way that, you know, people work within the landscape. The important thing is that you're never quite sure what you're going to get in terms of conditions in landscape photography.
True.
And therefore, you're always going to be challenged by what you get put in front of you, as opposed to what your expectations may be. And you've then just got to work yourself into an emotional state where you go, okay, well, I'm not worried about the fact that it is a blue sky day, because there's something else that I can do here that changes up. So I'm not going to get that beautiful panorama of the you know, the stormy skies that I had in my head. I've now got to think differently and do something differently. And that in itself is one of the best challenges that you can put yourself into, is go out with either zero expectations or go out with an expectation and then have to change your direction because things aren't going the way that you expected them to.
And for your favourite subject, seascapes, I mean, you can go to the same location. It's not just the weather, of course, it's the sea and the tide and that, and whatever the detritus might be that's up on the shore as well, of course. So it's always changing.
Yeah, well, one of my favourite beaches is Turrameadow, and it's paradise for photographers simply because every time you go there, there's something different.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I've seen it change within hours, actually, but I've seen it change over a matter of days. You have a storm come through, and all of the sand on the rocks disappears, and then another storm comes through, you know, a week later, and all the sand is back, and you know, the weeds there 1 week, and it's not there 2 weeks later, and you know, it just constantly changes, and that constant change, I think, gives you challenges in itself, but it also helps you be creative and look at things differently when you're seeing that one place change. And I'm talking a stretch of only a couple of 100 meters.
That's
long.
Right. It's only small. Yeah, just up the road from my place.
Yeah. But I guess, what are the things that you look for when you're going out into a new location? What sort of things do you sort of say, okay, well, this is what I'm on the hunt for? Is it different for each location?
No, and that's where I come back to, I suppose I can sound all arty, and I say, I'll wait for the location to speak to me, but what I'm coming back to is all of those ideas that we have, so that over the years I've built up this database of ideas. And so when I go out, I'll look at something, and then it's like the Rolodex in the background. It flips down into the A's or to the K's or whatever it is, and here's an idea, and I think, there's an idea. So that's where I come back to having this background of knowledge of what other photographers, what other painters, what other films, what other writers, you get your inspiration. Music, for instance, doesn't have to be other photographers that inspire you, but you just, these things inform you. So when you're looking at it, an idea comes to you. So where do my ideas come from? I don't know. I mean, I just stand there and I have the idea. Why do I have those ideas? Well, I think The reason I've got those ideas is because I have edited a photography magazine for the past 40 years or so. I've interviewed photographers. My whole life has been photography. If I haven't got some ideas at this stage, I better hurry up. I'm going to run out of time, aren't I? And that's why, if you're relatively new in your career as your passion as a photographer, you'll get better the more you immerse yourself and understand what other photographers are doing. Look at more of those Instagram feeds if that's what does it for you. More photo books, go to the movies, look at the way the cinematographers really set up some of their films. I mean, Game of Thrones, forget all the sex and gratuitous violence, that's nothing. The lighting, the composition, the framing is just sensational. It really is.
And the locations,
And the locations,
yeah. One of my favourites is actually Ripley. And if you're into black and white, the tones and the way the cinematography is set up there and the compositions, etc., all of those things that we were talking about, but in particular, the black and white mix that it's got is just, it is chef's
it's got a very clean light, isn't it? I mean, that's how I describe it. It's very clean, and it's hard and soft, but it's got that, hard to describe, but I know what you mean.
Crisp is probably the word that sort of comes to my mind when I look at it.
Okay,
but clean is another good one. But so if anyone that is looking for inspiration in their black and white photography, I recommend Ripley, and Peter recommends Game of Thrones. So
That's right.
Both good options, I think, and they're pretty good stories as well.
Well, I have, when I go down to the Antarctic or up the Arctic, and there are the seasick days, I don't handle seasickness too well. And so I will take my Finnegan, and that's not medical advice for anybody else, lie down on my bed, and I've got my iPad with every episode of Game of Thrones. And so usually watching one of them will send me off to sleep. And hopefully I don't get too far into the episodes before the weather finds up and I'm not so bad.
Yeah, nice. Let's talk about the magazine. You mentioned it a couple of times. Where did that start for you? Was that something that you sort of just fell into and decided?
Yeah, totally fell into it. I was at Mossman Camera Club, and I was 19, and a friend of mine, Elizabeth Luff, and she was my mum's age, and we were good friends. And she knew a bloke called Paul Curtis, and Paul used to edit one of the other photo magazines, and he set up his own, and he knew Elizabeth because they were neighbours or something like that. And so she wrote an article, and she said to me, the age of 19, she said, you should write an article for this new magazine. And so I was in the third issue of Australian Camera Craft, and that's how I started. So I would be writing articles, it was monthly in those days, regularly for them. And then I went skiing for 6 months, and I came back, and I was fully determined to go back and do another couple of seasons being a ski bum. But Paul was looking for an editor for the magazine, and I put my hat in the ring and I got the gig. So I had to give up being a world-class skier. I've never been a world-class skier, but it was just an opportunity that I took. And so I was there for, I don't know, to around 1990. So it was 1979 was the first issue. I was probably there until 1995 or thereabouts. And then they got taken over by another company and things changed. And so I set up my own magazine with my wife, Better Photography. Didn't want to do too much work, so we did it quarterly, and it's been going since. Today, it's very small. We've probably got 1,000 to maybe 1,500 readers. So I've watched it contract as young people don't buy magazines. Fewer people actually buy the magazine. But I guess my hook, my carrot for people is that you can find everything you want on the internet. But you've got to know that you want to find it in the first place. Whereas if you subscribe to a magazine, the magazine's going to have a whole lot of different writers who are going to come up with different ideas that you might never have thought about. And so I still think that there's room for a curated set of ideas, a photo magazine, for people to, just to involve themselves. They won't be interested in every article, but if you get every issue and you find one idea that sets you off onto something, then I think that's a good contract. I think that's a good deal. So anyway, that's my spiel. And it's you get all the back issues as well for free. They're all online. Well, I shouldn't say all, from issue 54, and we're up to 124 at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. If people want to find that, how do they find it?
It's at betterphotography.com. So www.betterphotography.com.
Yeah, perfect. Let's talk a little bit about the professional side of and the business side of photography.
Yep.
You come from a publishing background, so getting published is...
I put my own photos on the cover of my own magazine. It's really easy. Covers aren't a problem.
Really easy. No, I wasn't actually going to say that. But it's something that you would be very familiar with in terms of getting your name out there and getting people to see your work and be able to approach you and your work. The other side of it, though, is, aside from getting your name out there, is actually running the business. And I guess I'm really keen, and I ask a lot of professional photographers that I talk to about how they work their way through that process of thinking about photography as a business, as opposed to the bit that everybody imagines photographers do, which is go out, take a photo, print it and sell it and make bank, which, as we all know, isn't really what happens.
No, I used to do business planning courses for photographers, and I always used to laugh and I'd say, well, there are 100 people here, 85 of you will be back in 2 years when I redo this, and you won't have done a bloody thing. And unfortunately, with the creative fields, most people are in love with sitting down at their computer and editing the photos and making it look beautiful. But who's going to buy them? Where does that come from? And when I interviewed professional photographers over the years, I always used to ask them, how much time are you actually shooting? And how much time are you doing business type stuff? And the good photographers might be shooting 2 days a week, and they were marketing themselves 3 to 4 days a week. You heard of a little person called Annie Leibovitz?
Yep.
Now, I'm paraphrasing this, and I don't know how true it is, but everybody knows her name. And she obviously started off with Rolling Stone, and she had a good head start. But I was told by someone that she had 3 PR people working for her full time to get her name out there. So how true that is, it's been exaggerated, etc. The point I'm making is that Annie didn't become famous just because she was a good photographer. She's a damn good businesswoman. And so she knew how to make things happen. And so many of the good professional photographers, their photography is exemplary. Annie's is exemplary, no question about it. But there are other photographers who are just as good, but they might be a little bit quiet, or they just weren't as motivated. They weren't as good at business. And so they are two quite different disciplines. What some photographers would do is they would hire an agent. And when you got up into the top ends a little bit, you'd get an agent and they would go in and a job you might be quoting, 5-10 grand for, they might be quoting $80,000 for, and they would be able to convince the advertising agencies to get it. So there are wonderful big stories. There's also a lot of low end stuff where people say, I've got some advertising work to do and it's $100 job. So don't listen, for people out there listening to it, I'm talking about the old days. In the days in the film when we had a dark room and nobody knew what we did in the dark room, we could charge an awful lot more until when we got Lightroom. Now that everyone's got Lightroom, it's not a secret anymore. And so the value of photography has come down a lot. But if you're going to make it in photography, I think you've either got to find an edge. So people who are doing like drone work or combining it with film and website design or stuff like that, and they get a group of clients who need all of those services, that seems to be working today. Or you've got to be someone who's personable. So there'll still be, wedding and portrait photographers who are doing very well, but it's because they're a nice person, because people like dealing with them. And so it's people skills as much as anything else. So photography is, being a good photographer, maybe 20% of the game. Being a good business person, good 80% for sure.
Yeah. And I think that balancing act of having to wear all of the hats, being the CEO, the finance manager, the whatever, as well as the photographer and the creative driving force behind the business is really difficult for a lot of creative people. It's not those other aspects, the administrative aspects, are not really in their wheelhouse. And, the challenge is getting good at those if you want to be a good professional photographer.
Being good at those, or there's so many friends of mine who were married. Sometimes the photographer's the woman, sometimes it's the man, but the other partner has been very good at the business side of things. And a lot of my friends were successful in that way because the business was successful because of their partner rather than from them. And so if you're not good at business, then find someone who is good that you can mentor from or get to in your business to help you out. So there are ways and means, that's for sure. Yeah. But I think that the golden days of big money photography. They still exist, but there are so few of them that it's hard to make a living full time from just those few big jobs. And so it is a tough gig these days.
Yeah, yeah. I want to come back to that value of photography, but I'll leave that till a little bit later. I want to dig into some stuff around your workshops. What could somebody expect when they're on a Peter Eastway workshop?
Well, it depends. So we have workshops and we've got photo tours. And so I guess it's important to understand the difference. Like we've got Shark Bay aerial workshop. And so when we take you on that, we take you up in the planes or the helicopters, and then on the ground, we go through all the post-production. So it really is a workshop so that people see our Tony and my aerials and they say, I'd love to be able to take photos like that. Our guests come back and they've got photos like that. We show them exactly how to do it, the steps involved. Same with Middlehurst. Middlehurst is very much immersive in that, we're there, you've got your laptops, we spend the whole day where we take you through the creative process. We go out and take photos, but then it's the conversations that we have when we're back at the lodge, over meals, or when we're doing what we call our image lab sessions, where we help you through. So it's one-on-one helping. A photo tour is a little different in that we're going places to take great photos. And if people want me to go and set their camera up and say, wait for 5 minutes, when the sun comes up, take it, I'll do that. But most people don't ask me to do that. What people like is we get to a place and they like to share it. What's of interest? I find that interesting, and they disappear. Then they come back, and the real interaction comes when we're traveling from place to place, and they just ask questions. We're always talking photography, and so it's not sold as a workshop, but on a photo tour, when you're away with someone like David Oliver or Tony Hewitt or myself, we do have a lot of experience. We can create interesting conversations and give you interesting answers, things for you to consider and take forward. I guess the easiest answer is to say that on our workshops and photo tours, probably 70% of people are repeat businesses. They've been on more than one with us. We've got people who've been on 10 or 15 as well as some of them. I always worry about them though, because if we're supposed to be teaching them and they keep coming back, what does that say about me as a teacher? Anyway, I'll not go there though. Because photography, and the answer to that is because as they develop, and I can think I won't embarrass them, but we've got a number of photographers whose work that is out there, it's of world standard, and Tony and I look at them and say, well, I didn't teach them to do it that well. And they've really done really well. And that's the things that we had. I remember David Moore judging some of my work way back, and he just gave me a little bit of feedback and then was always there to help, etc., if I had a question or whatever. Just having those people around to give you the incentive is something that we like to be able to do for other photographers as well.
Nice.
And thank you for asking the question.
No, pleasure. The other thing that a lot of people struggle with when they're trying to start a photography business is pricing, and how they price either their time, or if they're doing a jobbing photography business, or prints, if they're selling prints and so forth. Do you use a formula, or do you make it up on the spot? How do you come up with your pricing? I know there's no secrets in any of this.
Yeah, no, well, there's no secrets. If I'm selling my prints, I try and get as much as I can, because there's not much point selling them for $5 if I can get 10. Yeah. So and I see a lot of people saying, oh, I've sold a print. And you think, oh, that's fantastic. I'm going to go professional. Oh, yeah. How much did you sell the print for? Oh, $300. Oh, great. How much did the print cost you to frame? Oh, $150. And the print, $25. So you've got $100 left, and you need $100,000 a year. How many prints a year? So there are some things where you've got to look at it. Do you want to be a professional photographer? Yep. Or do you want to just earn a little bit of pocket money to help fund your hobby? And in many ways, that's what I've done all my life. I've got lots of business interests, but I've always, I've done big jobs for, Panasonic Japan used to get me to do their big brochures once a year, which was always a stressful time. But most of my stuff has been stuff that I've loved doing. And that's the difference. If you're going to be a professional, you're doing stuff for other people. And so this love of photography that you have now, if you're an enthusiast, may be lost, very often is lost. A lot of people who did weddings and portraits for 20, 30, 40 years don't love doing them as much as they did when they started, because they've been through it so much. Whereas I'm just as keen about going out on a photo tour or taking landscapes as I was 50 years ago. And so I think the first question is, do you want to be professional? And I'd suggest, if you're watching this podcast, probably not, because you're enthusiastic, you love photography. And then if you can sell the photos, well, if someone comes along and buys a print from you, it's such an honour for someone to think that your photo is good enough to have it up on their wall. I really don't care whether you make a lot of money out of it or not. That's not the issue, because you're never going to be making so much, well, I shouldn't say you're never. To start off with, it doesn't really matter. What you want to do is get that reputation first. And then if at the end of a couple of years you've got people buying a couple of prints every month or whatever, well, then maybe it's time to go and talk to a gallery, have an exhibition, get someone to represent you, and then your prices can go up. So I always tell people, make the sale first and don't worry about how much money you're making yet, assuming that you don't need to be making a living out of it from the get-go. So don't give up your job as a bank manager just yet. Oh, you mightn't have a job as a bank manager because AI is taking over that. Don't give up your job as a waiter yet. You might have to gradually ease yourself into being a photographer.
Fantastic. Something that I always ask is, do you have a favourite place, somewhere that keeps calling you back, that you just want to be there?
No, I was in Antarctica for a month, and then I was up in the Pilbara for a month, and I was interviewed on Port Hedland Radio up in the middle of the Pilbara there. And I was asked by the radio interviewer, well, what's the favourite place you go to? And I always say, my favourite place is the next place I go to. Nice. Because how can you compare a white desert with a red desert? I mean, it's sort of like saying, which do you prefer, an apple or an orange? And well, it just depends, doesn't it? I mean, you might like both, or a tomato, it's completely different. And so I think that to have a favourite is too limiting. And so there are lots of places, and that's why I do repeat and rinse. I go to a lot of places many, many times, and I like going to new places as well, because that's what keeps it exciting. So I don't really think I've got an answer for that, but so no, I don't have an answer.
Fair enough. What about a memorable place? Is there somewhere that you have had an experience that you've just gone, wow, this is something that's always going to stay with me?
I think that over the career I've had, I've got so many of those. I mean, that's why I can gas bag to you. There are just so many examples. In the New Tradition book, there are, out of the 100 little stories, 50 of them are just little anecdotes of being places. I think of one photo in there where I was away with Les Walkling and Andres Apps. Andres Apps is sort of like the Ansel Adams of landscape photography over in New Zealand. Done a lot of books as well, like a Peter Dombrovskis for Australia. And funnily enough, Ansel and Peter Dombrovskis were on the same ship from Europe, and Peter got off in Tasmania and Ansel got off in New Zealand, but I digress. But so Les and I and Andres, we went to Andres's place. He was living at that stage on the west coast of the South Island of New Zealand, and we spent a week with him. We hired a helicopter and we went up to the top, and we had all of this safety gear, and then the cloud came in, and we were in cloud for the whole day, and we sort of hoped, I hope the wind comes up and blows the cloud away. Otherwise, it was a long, long walk down to the bottom. We were hoping to get the helicopter. Anyway, it cleared and we turned up. And there's just this photo I've got shot on medium format, a self-timer, and we've got the three of us all just standing there looking heroic underneath Mount Adams, fresh snow. It's just a straight shot, but it is a wonderful memory. And I'm just giving you this one as one of hundreds that you have as a photographer. There isn't one, but that was a great memory, just being there with two of my heroes.
Nice. We talked a little bit about photography's place in society, and it's a question that I often ask for photographers about how they see photography in society. And I'm interested in your perspective, not so much on where it is now, but where it is now in respect to where it used to be. You talked about the boom days of photography where you could get $80,000 advertising contracts and those sorts of things, which are rarer than hen's teeth now. How do you think things have changed in terms of the way that society views photography?
Well, I think I look at National Geographic magazines, and in the 40s, 50s, 60s, a photograph was called illustrative photography. And Michael Coyne who's written a whole philosophy and all this, and he's a documentary photographer, might disagree. But my takeaway is that it was illustrative photography. And so what you would do is you would set up something, and take a photograph to illustrate some aspect of life or the story or whatever.
Sure.
Whereas that style of photography now has been morphed from illustrative and it's become sort of like documentary photojournalism. And now it must be pure. You cannot adulterate, because we all understand how Photoshop can change things. And so we're worried about what we see in a photograph might not be the truth. Well, it's never been the truth and it's still not the truth. But really, photography has been given the short end of the wedge, because we as photographers can't do things that writers and filmmakers. Have you ever watched David Attenborough of his wildlife, and there'll be a lion chasing a rabbit? Well, the rabbit was probably in Ethiopia and the lion was probably in India, and they've just put the things together because what they're trying to do is to show, to illustrate a story. And it works beautifully well. But as a wildlife photographer, you can't go and take a rubbish bin out of the back or whatever, because they've got all of these special rules. Same for a documentary and a photojournalist photographer. And I understand why. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be like that. I'm just saying that's how it's changed. It has to be like that, because unless you have firm and fast rules, we're going to be fooled. Now AI's here, we're going to be fooled all the time anyway. It'd be really interesting to see how they deal with that. I remember, as a little aside, going to the World Press Photo, and one of the directors was there, and we was having a little bit of a chat, saying how when you put photos into World Press, you're not allowed to do much in terms of editing. They say minor adjustments to exposure and contrast and colour and stuff like that. And he said, it's interesting though, a lot of photographers will do a minus 100% colour saturation. In other words, they turn it into black and white because they feel that black and white gets a better gig with the judges than colour photos. And he said, we were thinking of changing the rules to say that you could only put black and white photos in if you used a black and white only camera, like the Leica M, something like that, or an achromatic back. It was tongue in cheek. But that is interesting, isn't it? We've come out of a world where black and white film was around, and so we just accept that, oh yeah, you can turn a colour photo 100% colour desaturation, that's okay. But if I want to add in 25 colour saturation, I can't do that. That's not real, not allowed. So different ways of looking at things. It's a complicated area.
Definitely. What do you see as photography's biggest challenge beyond AI? AI is obviously going to challenge reality, but I think there's other aspects in society which have got challenges for photography regardless of what happens with AI.
Yeah, I don't think, the photography that we do, I don't think AI is really challenging it. It's sort of like saying, well, it's probably not like saying that. Digital challenged film, and basically digital took over from film. There are still people who use film today.
Yep.
AI, in terms of society, is going to take over from digital photography, but there'll still be people like you and I who take digital photos and maybe even film photos. But we're going to become a cottage industry. We're going to become a craft or something like that artists do. We're not going to be part of the mainstream. And I think, though, we will still continue to use our phones to take photos, because it's probably still going to be quicker than typing in something. Well, actually, you won't have to type it into AI anymore. You'll be able to use the dictation and say, make me a photograph of being in Peru in 10 years' time, or whatever it is they're going to do. So I guess where I'm coming from is that I don't think AI or the future needs to impact us at all. And so I am getting ready to be both a dinosaur and a Luddite, in that I like photography the way it is. I like what I'm doing, and I don't like, it's not that I don't need AI, and I don't want to create images like AI, because I've got enough on my plate just doing what I'm doing. And so we can be quite comfortable just staying where it is. Will we become less and less important to the majority of society? Yes, but that's inevitable anyway. And by that time that happens, we'll probably be in a box 6 foot under or cremated somewhere, so it doesn't matter.
That's it. What is the best and or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
Sorry, the best
and or worst piece of advice anyone's given you?
Oh, pass. I can remember people telling me that a boss I was going to work with was always very, I'd be impossible. I'd never be able to work with him. And we got on so well for 20 years. And we've been good friends all his life. And I find that there are a lot of people out there who are giving good and bad advice. I'm probably one of them. Listen to advice and don't necessarily take it, I guess would be my advice. But don't take that. You should listen to everything I say.
All right. I think we probably should think about wrapping up. I've only got another couple of questions. Are there any other photographers that you think I need to be talking to?
Well, I think you need to talk to Andres Apps or Les Walkling.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. My last question is one that's been troubling the photography industry for a long time and other parts of society as well. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
100%. Awesome. And if you go over to Italy, you won't find it anywhere.
That's exactly right. All right, Peter, thank you so much for being on the show. I've really loved talking to you. Where can people find your work?
So you'll find I've got two websites. So it's petereastway.com, which is my personal stuff. And if you get to there are links that take you back to my Better Photography website, which is where you can sign up for a newsletter, where you can see my workshops. And then from there, you can get access to the magazine, the photo process course that I talked at the beginning. You'll find links from betterphotography.com or petereastway.com.
Fantastic. I'll make sure there's links in the description of the podcast as well.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Ran. Cheers.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com. I'm also on Vero, Photo, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and Blue Sky. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because it really helps the podcast to be seen and heard. I'm Grant Swinburne, and I hope to see you out shooting soon.